it's so important to get real world feedback from your actual customer demographic versus internal people who attempt to put themselves into that mindset. You are your customer. You're not going to find some of the key insights that are only going to be found from going external to the people that you're actually marketing this product towards, who are actually going to be buying it and using it. When it comes to new product introduction, beta testing is one of the best ways for you to actually get your product solution in front of and in the hands of the people who really are going to use it.
In this episode, we dive into the world of innovation and relaxation with our special guest, Mike Mars. From pioneering cutting-edge printers at HP to revolutionizing the wellness industry with luxurious hot tubs at Watkins Wellness, Mike has brought a lot of groundbreaking products to market. Join us as we explore his journey across diverse industries, uncovering the secrets behind successful product launches and the transformative power of quality. Get ready for an inspiring session filled with insights and stories from Mike Mars. Let's get into it.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us on the Delta Huddle podcast. Kick us off just by talking more about what you do at Watkins and what NPI looks like there.
Watkins Wellness, so it's a company I've been at for about, I don't know, two years, a little over 2 years at this point, and we do make spas, hot tubs, which are very relaxing. They're actually amazing products. Now, the new product delivery aspect of new spas and hot tubs isn't necessarily relaxing, right? It's just as hectic and as stressful as getting out any other kind of new type of product. Basically, what I'm managing from a program management perspective is a new product. Usually, in some cases, it's a brand new product line. In other cases, it's the next generation of, a changing of a model year or redesign of an existing product line. But taking it and working with the cross-functional team to take it from design concept through vendor selection, qualification for tooling, to the development units, to the pre-production units, to actual production and releasing to the customer. So it is kind of the whole kind of beginning of the life cycle piece until it's out to production. Of course, I'm focused on new products, so I'm not there until the grave, right? When we kind of finally put it to bed, or so I'm not cradle to the grave, but I'm certainly cradle to production, and all things involved with that. So very dynamic environment. Sitting in the hot tub is relaxing, but new product introductions definitely is not.
Yeah, that kind of ends up being the reward after all of this kind of toil to get it to market, right? It's like I can finally sit back in my hot tub and relax. One thing that you mentioned was kind of these cross-functional kind of environments that you're working in, and it sounds like you have a lot of different points that you need to touch on when working through the MPI process. And a lot of our recent episodes, we've touched on that a lot, where, whether it's someone who's in beta testing or if they're kind of leading a new product design, they need to do a lot in order to communicate with these teams and get everyone on the same page. So one thing I was interested in is, how do you tackle kind of that cross-functional communication, and how do you make it work in a way that's like, okay, we don't have a lot of friction and we're able to drive the progress of this product forward?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's a very kind of nuanced and somewhat complicated answer, I think. I mean, my style is, I like to communicate. I like to bring everyone as appropriate into the conversation. Sometimes maybe I over communicate, but I will do that because I want everyone to know what's going on, right? And I want to kind of continue to drive home what the objectives are, stay on top of them. At Watkins, we work in an environment where we have many balls in the air. So, when we're looking at one particular new product introduction of, say, let's say 4 new spa models within a product line, and we have a team that's working on that. That team is also working on a number of other projects as well. So, from my standpoint, if you don't consistently communicate and frequently communicate, they can lose focus off of that particular initiative and focus maybe on this one, right? So, I think frequent communication is very much needed. One of the things that I've found to be very effective over the last year here is taking kind of an agile, like stand-up style approach to meetings and communication versus the one time a week kind of core team meeting. We do a hybrid of those right now. What we like to do is have, kind of a daily stand-up type meeting for the folks that are actually doing the work, which you would see in like an agile scrum type environment, and then maybe designate one meeting at the end of the week, let's say Fridays, to be more inclusive of the rest of the stakeholders, to allow them to come in and kind of see what's going on, share their feedback, and get informed. So, that's the way we've been handling it at Watkins. I found it to be effective. Again, I think, if you don't have that communication and that, I guess, tight coupling with the folks on the team, because there are so many balls in the air, it's easy for people to get, focused on something other than your project and maybe, kind of forget to maybe take care of this or that because the focus is somewhere else. So I think it's very important to have that frequent communication when you're working with these cross-functional teams.
So are you guys mostly in office, or are you hybrid, or how's that?
We're hybrid. So certainly it depends on the role, right? But because we do our own manufacturing, the folks that are in the manufacturing side need to be there every day. We do some of our manufacturing in Vista, California, which is where I'm based out of, my home office. And then we do the rest of our manufacturing, which is kind of the majority of our manufacturing, in Tijuana, Mexico. Thankfully, it's not too far away. It's not like, HP, where we'd have to fly to Thailand to the manufacturing center where we'd make all of our printers. It's nice that it's at least somewhat local. But that's where the teams are. So a lot of the office types like me, we're very much hybrid, but we do spend time at the manufacturing locations where the work is being done, whether it be in Vista or Tijuana. Earlier this year, I was spending a lot of time in Tijuana, 1 to 2 days a week, just down there with the team, ensuring that things are moving, things are happening, the projects that are prioritized are getting focused on. Now we're getting towards the tail end of the year, and I'm more focused in Vista, so I'm going to be spending more time in Vista. But yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag right now, with the office people mainly hybrid and our production people being on site.
Cool. And I love the stand-up idea. That's like a normal thing, I guess, in Agile.
We're not always standing, but we still call it a stand.
We've had a few at Centercode where we really, like, we go stand in a circle and we'd all go talk amongst the thing, and then we'd move back to our desks. But that was when we're in the office. So what kind of other communication? So those meetings happen. Is there communication going out before that? Is there communication going out after that? And then what are you kind of delivering in that end of week to your stakeholders based on all of those conversations that you just had in your stand-up?
Yeah, so I mean, we're a Microsoft shop here, so we use the Microsoft suite of tools. So, we of course use Teams to instant message. So there's a lot of that going on outside of the stand-ups or these core team meetings, constantly communicating over Teams. We'll also use Teams to link. We create a channel in Teams for the specific project. And in that channel, I'll link to my Microsoft OneNote, which I use to take notes in the stand-ups, the core team meetings, whatever meeting it may be, and I'll link it to a tab in the Teams channel so people can go out there whenever they would like, grab those notes. So that's an artifact that we create through these communication channels. Now, what we're talking about here is kind of the day-to-day. How do we keep things moving? How do we track progress? How do we communicate out? Now, from a kind of a wider communication to the stakeholders, what we have here is a stage gate process that we use to step new products through kind of, from the early stage to production. There's 5 stages. And when we're getting to the end of each one of those stages, we have a stage gate review where we bring in kind of all the stakeholders up to the president of the company to share out where we are from each functional area, update them on the risks, and then look to, what we call a recommendation panel to give the team the go-ahead to either pass that checkpoint or hold, come back in a week or two to clean up these risks that we're uncomfortable with. Or if it's, the case where it's a project that just really isn't viable anymore for whatever reason, then, that would be the time to decide not to work on it anymore. So that's a communication piece, a stakeholder kind of management piece that happens outside of those stand-ups and core team meetings.
Cool.
Yeah. And I love that you guys are just so committed to communicating so openly like that. It sounds like, you're very well vertically integrated, right? You guys are handling production and all this stuff. And the amount of communication your teams are having, no pun intended, seems really, really conducive to getting the product across store. And admittedly, as a former Microsoft employee, hearing all that stuff about Teams in OneNote is like music to my ears. So that was perfect right there. One thing I wanted to ask is, you did mention this sort of stage gate process. You have these 5 stages and whatnot. Are you integrating feedback from teams at every single stage in this process? Or is there a point where you say, okay, now is the right time to start collecting feedback and getting a little bit more insights from the teams around us?
So, I think what you're asking is, how do we populate kind of the high level status going into these stage gate reviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we're really managing the schedule, the detailed project schedule, which right now we're using Smartsheet to manage that. So we're not using a Microsoft tool for that one, but we do manage the detailed project plan through Smartsheet. And, we're always looking at least on a weekly basis, where we are in kind of checking off all the boxes needed for that particular stage. Now, as we're getting to the end of that stage, we'll bring up our PowerPoint template with the stage gate deliverables, and each one of the functional teams will own a slide in each one of those stage gates. Mm-hmm. So we will get together as a team and populate those slides together, with the understanding that that function really owns the content. But I think it's important that that content is not pulled together in a silo, right? We want to pull it together as a team to make sure that, if there's any open items there, anything that we're planning on showing a yellow or a red, that we have an opportunity to try to clean that up, or maybe answer any unknowns with that content together as a team before we go into the checkpoint. So pulling together that content is done in a cross-functional way prior to going into the checkpoint, usually about a week before we go in. There's a couple iterations on it, because usually you'll find, some things in there that we want to clean up, and we have time to clean up before we go into the checkpoint. Mm-hmm. So that's really how we manage it, just to make sure that everyone's aligned. We're not going to be surprised, our team, the working team, of any of the content that's going to be shown. And another important piece of this checkpoint process is our team pulling together our recommendation on what the disposition should be going into the checkpoint. So, do we think we should pass? If so, why, right? It's very uncommon to go into one of these checkpoints without anything being yellow, but, if we feel like the risk is manageable, we have a path forward, we don't think that it's going to have an overall impact on the schedule, we'll still recommend that we pass this checkpoint to keep moving. for these reasons, right? So we want to give ourselves time to formulate that disposition, and we want the whole team to be in agreement on that disposition before we go into the meeting.
Yeah,
are we talking about software and hardware, or is it just mostly hardware components?
We're talking mainly about hardware components when we're talking about, you know, the development of these new spas. We certainly do have electronics, control boxes, control panels, new firmware, new UI that we certainly are managing as well. But because we're dealing with a lot of hardware and a lot of tooling, the way that we have to manage these projects is it's very waterfall in that the requirements really need to be in place before you go spend, you know, $100,000 on this tool, right? It's a little bit different than software development where we have that flexibility to iterate kind of after we say go.
Yeah, I'm so interested in this component of at what point does an executive or a key stakeholder get access to what would be the product to be able to like see it and use it and try it and give feedback on it? Because it sounds like there's a lot of stages. We're probably dealing with very small pieces that combine to be something big. So I'm just wondering, like, when do your stakeholders get to see a working product?
A working product. So that would be our first development unit. So it would be like a pre-production prototype. So it would be after we completed our tooling to actually produce real hardware. I mean, that's the most kind of real representation of what the product's going to be that a stakeholder would get to really experience. Now with spas, you know, a lot of the experience is actually sitting in it, right? And feeling the jets, you know, is it meeting those customer experience goals, you know, and that's a time when something like that can be done. There are some earlier prototypes that we do that are less representative, but we do have a pre-production prototype in one of the later stages where we really get to kind of feel it out. And then beyond that, that's when we start to prove out the design of that pre-production prototype in the actual production environment and have it be built by production personnel to help us tease out any issues that we may not have been considering that may impact production, you know, ergonomic issues, for example, you know, access issues, space issues, things like that, that wouldn't necessarily be caught in a lab environment where that pre-production prototype is built.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, what's interesting is like when you take a lot of software components and even some hardware, like you can 3D print a lot of hardware nowadays to like get a feel and a look of it, and you can get mock-ups and UI designs, and you can test stuff and get feedback. Seems a little bit harder in your case, right? Like you can get feedback, but it's all real conceptual, right? Like they probably won't even, like people may not even see what it looks like or the actual UI. So I'm just, when are you bringing in those users? Because I know you guys do run beta tests. I'd seen some of that online with some dealers and whatnot.
Right.
But like, is that a formal process for you guys to include that? Is it much later because you have to get through some of those development builds and those big prototypes?
It depends on the solution. You know, if it's something that is going to be, gosh, I'm searching for the right word here. If it's something beyond kind of a new spa with basically kind of the same components that are maybe reconfigured, then we would go more of that beta route. But, you know, if it's an aesthetic change, things like, you know, the external kind of cabinetry updates, things like that, we wouldn't necessarily go to beta with a change like that. It's more kind of driven by, you know, our design team, our product team, and voice of the customer feedback that we already have. So we don't deploy beta on everything. But if you have a situation where it's something that's easily updatable in the field, like firmware that is including a new feature set, then that's something that we would deploy out into a beta environment.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit as well is sort of comparing some of the experiences you've had with developing products here at Watkins to your experiences at HP. How similar is it? How different is it? Where can we draw that Venn diagram where they both kind of share the same characteristics? So I'd really kind of like to dive into that a little bit as well. Like kind of what was your NPI experiences like at HP? What were your beta experiences at HP? All that good stuff.
Sure. So at Watkins, it's much more manufacturing focused in that Watkins has its own manufacturing center. At HP, we outsourced our manufacturing to vendors in Asia, right? So it wasn't an HP manufacturing plant. It was a new Kimpo Group manufacturing plant, for example. So a lot of the aspects related to manufacturing were managed by that outsourced vendor with HP operations overseeing it. Here at Watkins, we're very much more hands-on with the operations team in that whole part of MPI. Now, also at HP, we were much more software, firmware focused. I know, Chris, when we worked together, I mean, we were often looking at new updates to software, new updates to firmware, adding feature sets and apps, things like that we would want to deploy out to our beta community. There isn't as much of that here at Watkins. There's some of that, but there isn't as much of that. Also, the touch points that we have with our customer are a bit different, whereas at HP, we would be looking for feedback from the end user. And our products were easy to deploy and get that feedback, right? Whether we're working on like the Sprocket Pocket printer or a new inkjet or something like that, we could easily, get 100 of those and ship those out to customers. With spas, it's a lot different, right? We can't exactly go, find people that fit a specific demographic and then ship them out a spa for them to try. It's just not really feasible. So, and also our main customers, at least in our specialty retail side of the business, are our dealers. So when we think about our customers in that context, it's really our dealers. So that's who we would typically engage with when it comes to things beta. They already have spas. They have many of them. And oftentimes we can tap into something that they already have on the floor to provide them, a new update to, something software focused for them to experience and provide feedback on. So it certainly is a very different dynamic, Watkins versus HP, in terms of just how you would go about deploying a beta, who you'd be looking from feedback from, and then just like kind of the flexibility that you have in finding participants, pulling in participants, and things like that.
It's definitely interesting. So Luke was just on a podcast. It was an IoT podcast, and he was talking about Bose. So Bose releases headphones. We'll just talk about headphones in a sense. And the idea is that they had to shift their mindset away from, I'm going to ship this one product and I'm going to start working on the next product, because they needed to start treating a lot of their products like services. And I know HP was definitely in that vein, right? Like, I need to get an update. I need software. This thing needs to be more compatible with the stuff that comes out next year and the year after. And it's just interesting thinking of that dynamic here of this market is still in that state of, it's not necessarily a service. It's going to be a release, and we're going to start working on the next one and integrating that feedback to the next version of the product. So yeah.
No, that's a very good point, and that's an angle I wasn't necessarily thinking of, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's less compatibility with systems concern with the Watkins product line than there was with the HP product line. We do have some apps, and we want to make sure that they're compatible with all the popular OSs and versions of the OSs and things like that. But it's a very limited, or more limited space than what we had at HP, where, you are focused on mobile apps, but you're also focused on desktop software. You're also focused on network connectivity, wireless protocols, things like that. So it was a much bigger space that we had to kind of, I guess, oversee our compatibility with and make sure that we can function, well within all of the different elements we're going to be interacting with.
Yeah, it was definitely cool when I first met you. You were working on the new products at HP, right? It wasn't just the basic printer that was being produced by HP. So I saw you working on a lot of the new innovative aspects of HP, and that was always a draw to me. HP is a very old company, and they had these printers for a while, and seeing your take and the innovation and integrating feedback at all the stages was eye-opening to me to see your interest in it and pushing for those initiatives. So,
well, I think, it's very interesting to see what HP had done then, and I would assume continues to do now. I mean, they have this inkjet technology that kind of took the world by storm. It got color printers in everyone's homes, and you were HP was living off of that for decades, right? But then at some point, it's like, okay, if there isn't this other transformative new innovation that we have to come up with, the new inkjet, what can we do to build on top of the existing inkjet to add more value? And that's what HP was doing with the various services and things that they were stacking on top of that solution. Things like instant ink, right? The ink subscription model, which I think is a great service, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
I think running out of ink.
Yeah, I mean, who wants to go to the store and buy new ink, right? Like now, I mean, through an instant ink or subscription, it's like $2 a month, and you get 50 pages per month, and you're never going to run out of ink. Now, at some point, would Watkins want to do something like that? We'll see. But to your earlier point, Chris, on what we would focus on at HP, it's those things that are new, unique, or different of the HP solution. It wouldn't just be taking this printer and giving it to people and asking them, about the print quality, because that aspect of the product wasn't new, unique, or different. It was already a proven technology, and we were very comfortable with how it worked, the quality that it produced. And at Watkins, we would follow that same mindset in terms of what we're going to deploy for a beta. If it's not new, unique, or different, then why, right? It doesn't necessarily need that type of insight and feedback. But when we do have solutions like that, we will deploy them in a beta environment to get those insights to help us iterate and make sure that we're really hitting that customer experience target.
Yeah. Well, one thing that also stood out to me is you talked about the connection with like vendors, for example. I know working with like Honeywell or Residio, they would have aspects of, we needed to include contractors, people that would be installing these devices in people's homes. Now you can go buy a Honeywell product and install yourself, but they were talking about the specific aspect of getting the vendors involved as contractors in the state and collecting feedback from them, because they're the ones that had to deal with it. They're the ones that actually had to sell it. They had to promote it on their side. They had to interact with it. They had to maintenance it. They had to do all of that fun stuff. Are you guys? You mentioned it. Are you guys including the vendors in that level of detail, or the voice of the vendor, if you would?
So I think when you mention that, the connection I would make there are the dealers, right? Because they would be kind of the vendor that's going to be selling and servicing the product.
Yeah.
When a customer buys a Watkins spa from one of our dealers, when they need support for that spa, they go to the dealer for support. The dealer is going to go out, service it. If they have an issue with the service of that spa, then they will let Watkins know. So we do a very good job capturing voice of that customer, our dealer customer, as it relates to serviceability. We also do a great job understanding what our service problems are. And through the product development process, through the stages, we do look at things like service to make sure that the spas are serviceable. We do look at quality issues that we know exist or could potentially exist to make sure that those don't make it into the final design. So I think, Chris, to answer your question, it's yes, we do pull in that feedback. We just may pull it in a different way, but it's something that's very important to consider, and it's something that we do consider.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of companies that have that I'll say middleman, for lack of a better term. And sometimes they focus only solely on that and not their end user. And then I have the inverse too, of people focusing solely on the end user, but not the people that are having to sell it or install it or maintenance or service it. And I feel like not having both of those can cause you a headache. If you're not listening to them, because you could just be missing a big bit of information on how you could either improve or iterate on your product.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, serviceability is a huge piece, especially in this business, because these are large investments for our customers, right? And it's something that's going to be there for a very long time. So you want to make sure that it can be easily serviced. There's not going to be any issues with that service. You're using high quality components, which we do, to ensure that we're going to meet that kind of warranty expectation that we have, and that our dealers have and our customers have. So it's absolutely very important that all of those things are considered when releasing something new.
Yeah. One comment that you made earlier that I found was really interesting, I want to dig a little bit deeper into, more on the HP side of things, was the idea that, when we're out here testing these products, we have a wide variety of technographics, and the topography of kind of our users is very different, right? We may have some users who are on MacBooks. We might have some users who are using Android phones. We may have people who are still using, legacy Windows devices, et cetera. So how did you guys sort of structure recruitment and kind of bringing in users so that you could have good coverage of all these different user types? Because especially if it's a mass market printer, right, it's designed to sort of be a one size fits all kind of product. It's like, this can be plugged into many different devices, many different OSs. So how did you guys tackle that? Were there any strategies that you used specifically to make sure that you had wide coverage of everyone within a beta program?
Yeah, I mean, the desire is to touch on all of that, right? I mean, you would look at market share data in terms of, device ownership. If you're talking about a mobile device, what's the market share in North America, if that's where you're going to be testing? It's huge, iPhones, right? So you'd want to go majority iPhone versus Android. If you're doing something like desktop software, web-based software, maybe it's on the cloud, you want to make sure that you're capturing the right web browsers based on market share. And we would look all of that up, right? Chrome is kind of by far the big one. So you'd want to make sure that you're hitting a lot of Chrome, but you also want to make sure that you're hitting a lot of Safari. I don't know who's still using, Microsoft Edge or anything anymore, but there's some people.
That would be me. Yeah, that's me.
You guys using it? I don't know. I never use it. Is it good now?
Just
I'm not
me.
sure.
It's just me.
Yeah, but you want to make sure that you're hitting all of those bases. I mean, if there's 10% above market share for any of those, you're going to make sure that it's accounted for somewhere, right? Now, at HP, we would also have a lab environment where we'd be taking all of those things into consideration as well, where we'd be testing with anything with kind of 5% above market share, and even in some cases below that, just as a sanity check to make sure there aren't any huge compatibility issues that you can catch anywhere. You certainly want to wait for a beta test to catch, something like, oh, it just doesn't work at all with Firefox, right? That's something that you can find out internally. But we would look at market share data. What else? We'd also work with our marketing team to look at the various personas that we were kind of targeting this particular product offering for, age groups, income brackets, number of kids, the things that they print, and then attempt to go find those people as well. I remember one of the tougher recruits that we did, and we were working with Centercode on this one, is we were working on the Sprocket pocket printer, which was very much geared towards teens. And for legal reasons, you can't just go out and recruit teens, right? You have to get adults. But you really don't want the feedback from the adult. You want the feedback from the kids. So we had to work with Centercode, and we got through it. It was pretty challenging, though, quite frankly, to find people with kids who were willing to provide us feedback from their kid. The adult was basically being the middle person, providing us with the insights that we needed from the target demographic. And that came from, us knowing from our marketing organization who this product is really being geared for, designed for, and then, working with, professionals like you guys to go out and find the right people to help us gain those valuable, field insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also mentioned that you also had at HP the lab environment, right? So you have kind of the control, and then you have the real world. Were there any situations where you got one result in the lab, and then you would launch a beta test, and then suddenly find out that it's like, oh, that's actually they don't correlate, like it doesn't match? Did that ever happen, or was it more like one-to-one, like what we see in the lab and what we see in the beta test kind of track pretty well with each other?
It's a good question. So I think, from a customer experience standpoint, there would be cases where we maybe thought something was good in the lab or even bad in the lab that didn't necessarily turn out that way in the field. Now, when you're talking about like a hard failure, a hard defect type of situation, those would usually match one-to-one. If it just doesn't work with this or that, it's not going to work with that in the lab environment or in the field. But, a point that I want to make is that it's so important to get real world feedback from your actual customer demographic versus internal people who attempt to put themselves into that mindset. And I think we've all kind of seen that where, and I would see it at HP where, I remember there was this one, and I forget what they were testing, but there was a group at HP, a particular team that wanted to do kind of a customer experience workshop where, it's a team of kind of middle-aged people. And, this person was going to put themselves in the mindset of a 15-year-old girl. And this one was going to put themselves into the mindset of a 30-year soccer mom. And then this one was going to be that one. I mean, kind of this role-playing type situation where they were using our products in this kind of mindset that they were creating for themselves and then providing us feedback based on how they think that particular persona would react, which I think does not have a lot of value, right? No. Something that I think is very important for everyone to understand in new product development is that you guys working on this aren't your customer. Sometimes you may be, but oftentimes you're not. And as much as you want to try to put your customer hat on, and try to do it. I mean, it's absolutely valuable. You're going to get value from it, but you're not them. As much as you want to, role play and everything else, you're not them. You're going to find some good stuff internally, but you're not going to find some of the key insights that are only going to be found from going external to the people that you're actually marketing this product towards, who are actually going to be buying it and using it. So I think, that's something very important for everyone to think about when it comes to new product introduction, beta testing, things like that. And if beta testing is one of the best ways for you to actually get your product solution in front of and in the hands of the people who really are going to use it, and provide you feedback from their perspective without role playing, what they think the experience is, which may provide you with information that, that thing that you thought was a big deal, no one even cares about it. Maybe in terms of priorities, you thought that was the number one priority issue that you had, your whole software team focused on. Maybe it turns out that it doesn't even matter all that much. Maybe it's this other thing that matters, right? Or the other way around. So, I think it's very important that people understand that, you are not your target customer. Your target customer is your target customer. And it's extremely important to get feedback from them rather than your internal working team or stakeholders.
Yeah. One way I'll phrase it is, your employees are not a substitute for your customers or your users.
Absolutely.
I was just at lunch yesterday, actually. Won't make any sense in the podcasts, but I was at lunch recently with one of my old coworkers from WD, and we were talking about dog fooding a little bit. And dog fooding always has this, I'd say, like this lens. People are saying, well, dog fooding feedback is biased, right? It's either like maybe they're really excited about the product or they're really pissed off about the product, right? So like we do testing and we get feedback from an HR person who like failed miserably, ran into every problem known, and gave it like a 10 net promoter score. Like, this thing rocks, 5 stars. It's like, you had the worst problems. Like, this did not work for you, but it skewed in one direction. And then we had engineers who just had these minor complaints about everything, 2 stars, right? Not a good product. And what I was kind of I was communicating with them, just having been now around the bend and inside this a bit, is that dog fooding has been twisted and turned into what is now like feedback collection, versus what its intent was product adoption and product awareness, right? You give your products to your employees so they can learn it, so they can adopt it and use it, because that's what you really want, is them to adopt. And then you want some feedback from them, but that's not all you want. You don't want just feedback. And you can't substitute that for what would be beta testing, because you still need that end user feedback. So I agree on your point.
And trying to implement some kind of product review rating score based on the dog food experience exercise that would actually inform design decisions that are going to be made, right? It's more, guys, this is what we're working on. This is what we're delivering. Use it. If there's some glaring, huge issue, is like, thinking of it from like a Scrum standpoint that, the product owner should know about. If we're really missing the mark here, let's bring it up, so we can pivot and correct it. But, to kind of put it out there to all these folks and do net promoter scores and star reviews and to come out of it thinking that, oh my gosh, based on this dog fooding experiment, we only have a 2-star product.
Yeah.
We need to just scrap
cancel it immediately.
Thing. Yeah.
It's done. Yeah.
Is not the right way to approach it.
Yes. Yeah. And sad to say, because it's so powerful in that the other aspect of a marketer, a good sales strategist, someone that's like a management support team, having access to that product before it goes out the door. It's incredibly valuable. They will be able to do their job so much better because they understand what the product is and have used it already, rather than need to do it on the fly, right? Like while it's live.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to tie that into is I think dogfooding is very good for transparency within an organization, though, because you can get some of those differing voices that maybe wouldn't always use the product, and you can get some kind of interesting ideas. Like maybe someone from marketing does have a really good idea for a feature that you could integrate, and that's not going to factor into like an NPS score, but you could say, oh, that's kind of an interesting thing that we could take maybe the next generation of the product or try to integrate it now before it gets to release. So this is kind of a question for both of you guys. How does dog fooding really kind of help that transparency, and how can it help break down some of those silos in interesting ways? And I'll start with you, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a good point right there. Just letting people experience it, get hands-on with it, because it really helps you understand what you're going to be delivering to the customer. I mean, kind of without that, it's a bit of a black hole, and it doesn't matter what position you're in the company, whether you're the president or the product manager. I mean, you kind of want to know what you're going to be delivering, and there's no real way to do that without getting into some dog fooding. So I think it's very important. And I like the example that you brought up, with a marketing person trying it out and discovering, it would really be great if we could do this. If I could go from here to here, because that's a feature I would like to access. Now, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily that needs to be part of the now MVP that needs to be there for launch, but it's certainly something that can be developed and put in the backlog to be prioritized for a future sprint, to pull into the product set as you guys continue to iterate and update. So yeah, I think it's hugely beneficial to dog food, the solution, versus just looking at something like wireframes of a UI and attempting to understand how that's going to interact with you as a customer when you actually pick it up and use it, because it's just not the same experience. You're not really going to get a true understanding of what you're delivering doing it that way. So for those reasons, I think it's hugely important to let people get hands-on with what they're going to be delivering to the customer.
Yeah, they have a different context. Like I wrote this in a subreddit the other day that was on product management. And the complaint was like, when do you include legal in product development? Because they're going to have to see something. A lot of products have, whether it's information or access or risks or all this stuff. And one thing that stood out to me in that was that like we've had legal at when I was working at WD, we'd have legal in our beta tests. They were actually great testers because they had a specific context that they were looking for as they were going through the product. Now their feedback, again, if the moment they say, I think the user will do this or complain about this, it's like, oh, they're putting a biased lens on. But when they're going back and saying, oh, we have to go do this stuff, like these things need to be in order before we go out, right? Or if I'm talking to a sales leader that's in a specific region, say they're APAC, or say they're in Europe, and they can add context of like, oh, my region we don't use this or don't have access to this thing. And it might be context that team that was developing just may not have thought of, right? Because we are humans and we miss things. So having access to more smart people is usually a good thing, as long as you channel it in the right direction and give them good, transparent instructions about what you expect for them and what you'd like for them to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a product offering that has legal implications, that could potentially, make you have to pull a feature, add a feature, something like that, I would recommend you get them involved sooner rather than later to make sure that you identify those things before you get way too far down the road. I'm curious, Chris, what were the kind of things at WD that legal would be looking at in beta?
A lot of it is the data storage, data wiping, formatting, clearing off stuff, even making some recommendations with like just personalization that would come through. It's stuff that we would need to have included in various aspects. Same thing with like privacy policies. Where's your data being used and stored? So like understanding what systems is going to, like a product manager may not know that, oh yeah, I got to have this stuff outlined in my privacy policy of where the data is going to, because it's got to go to this new engine that's on a different server and to this next thing. So like there's those are ones that I saw, especially like end user license agreements and where those were placed and whether or not you have it checked first versus they checked or they opt out. Like those are all things that they would bring to consideration, especially because laws change pretty dang frequently, especially in the tech space.
Yeah, the privacy space. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great insights. You guys are leaving me speechless here. So I think sort of starting to wind things down just a little bit. Mike, I wanted to ask you if you actually remember kind of the first beta program or the first pilot program that you ever ran. And what are some big lessons that you took away from that? You know, what are the things that you really learned that helped shape kind of the trajectory of your career since then?
What a great question. I got to really tap into the memory banks to go back to the first one. So I can, so, you know, I'm going to think about pre-Centercode and then maybe post-Centercode. So
yeah,
pre-Centercode, they were more unstructured, I would say, in terms of the insights that were delivered and the clarity at which the insights were delivered. We were working with a vendor that would help us find folks. I don't think that they were all that great at it. And they certainly didn't help us process the feedback to deliver any insights. So the method at which we would go about executing was very similar in that we would go out to customer sites. I would go, we would present the customer with the solution that we wanted them to evaluate. We would be there to record them setting up the product. If they ran into any pain points, kind of capturing that feedback without leading, right? And kind of letting them figure it out. You know, you do your, 10 plus participants, you have your notes from those sessions, you bring them back, and then you basically process the data and then come up with a presentation to share out. That's the way we did it pre-Centercode. Now, post-Centercode, it was great, and I was glad that we found you guys, and that I think you guys did a much better job helping us find the right participants. And then you guys just do an excellent job through your beta-bound software in capturing the insights and then pulling together those in a format that's easily digestible by anyone, right? So once we got involved with you guys, we kind of got rid of that other vendor once we found you guys and started to work with you guys just exclusively. It was just a major change for our program. Not only would we get those insights from our customer visits, which I know is a little bit of a different approach from at least what you guys were doing at that time, but we would have those participants in the beta-bound system using those tools to provide the feedback at which the platform would aggregate and then pull into these reports. So something that we didn't have to do, asking the great questions, like NPS. And I think didn't we do different types of NPS? I can't recall if there was just one NPS or there may have been some different variants of NPS. I can't remember exactly, but that was
probably
a great
couple variants.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of variants. That was a great addition. And then we got more comfortable doing the kind of just deploying it without the customer visits and having more of a longer term test cycle, which would involve us deploying firmware updates to those customers, asking them to maybe retry something that wasn't working before to provide feedback as to whether or not it was actually solving the problem that they had highlighted to us. just having that platform to interact with those testers was great. It was way above and beyond what we had been doing before. And I know we eventually did get our own beta bound license and our own community versus kind of having you guys manage the testing for us, which I hope HP continues to do today. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of, I think it was working what we started with, but not as well, right? I think once I got introduced to you guys, I saw a better way of doing things, and you guys provided that through, your expertise in recruiting and your software tools. And once we got on board with Centercode and what was happening with you guys, I think we were in a much better place.
Yeah. Always puts a smile on my face when someone says that at our company, there was the pre-Centercode era, and then there was like the post-Centercode era.
There definitely was.
Yeah, the post-Centercode era always seems to be much more sunshine and rainbows than everything that came before. So,
well, there's that, but I also want to just say, being part of the Centercode kind of family, if you will, also opens up lots of avenues for insights and collaboration with other people in the Centercode family. You guys host great events, networking events, your annual conferences that you would have where people would come in from various industries and present their experiences with beta tests, what they were working on with you guys, having the Centercode folks come out and share the new features that were coming. And it was just a great collaborative experience. I remember there was someone who was working on like a software platform to write movie scripts who was sharing their insights. I mean, just so many just different industries, people from T-Mobile kind of working with you guys to, test out whatever solutions they were deploying. But it was just a very diverse set of companies and people working within these companies you had the opportunity to interact with and learn from, which I think, benefits everybody who's part of that, versus kind of trying to build something on your own, trying to reinvent the wheel that does not need to be reinvented, and then, getting not as effective of results or outcomes, and then not having those collaborative kind of networking opportunities. So, I've always been a big proponent of Centercode and you guys and what you do. And, I would encourage anyone who's working in beta or thinking about working in beta to engage with Centercode and work with you guys to, kind of figure out the right path for them and their business.
Yeah, absolutely. Ringing endorsement there. I don't think I could have said it better myself. And I think that's been one of the advantages of the podcast is that kind of in the more remote era, we are able to bring in a lot of really kind of diverse voices and different industries and stuff like that. Like Pete, who you mentioned, he was a podcast guest not too long ago, and he had some amazing kind of insights to share. And that was still sort of in the midst of the writer's strike and everything. So it was really cool hearing him talk about that and kind of share a little bit of what he was going through, but also like, how do we integrate all this stuff and who are all the different people that we work with? Because in his environment, he's not just working with screenwriters, he's also working on the payroll side of things. So he was also talking about, look, we need to work with the people who are in lighting, who are in post-production, who are in hair and makeup, et cetera. So I think that's been one of the really cool things we've been able to do with the podcast is kind of have the same vibe of like, well, we can't always do an on-site big conference, but we can bring in so many different people and, really share that, that knowledge across a really wide network. And so we're tackling that. And I think, Chris, you still have some ideas for some other in-person events that we want to do in the future, right? We're trying to kick that back up again. Yeah.
They're back. Yeah.
They're back.
We're trying to do at least quarterly, trying to get maybe to a monthly cadence, at least trying an event, whether hosting, going to it, or sponsoring one, just trying to get everyone connected again, because the pandemic definitely spread everybody out and kind of cut off a little bit of lines.
Yeah. So last question I want to ask for you, Mike. Just what's some advice that you'd give to kind of your younger self, whether it has to do with beta or MPI or just, in general, what would you tell you, at the start of all this?
Gosh, it's a great question. I think have an open mind, and you don't know what you don't know, right? Go out and seek feedback, seek answers. Don't go at it alone. And when I say alone, I mean just from an individual standpoint, of course, but also from a team standpoint. Don't have your team go at it alone. Don't be afraid to partner with people. Make sure that you go out and capture feedback from your target users. It's so very important to do that. I know that, as I mentioned before, you'll have these internal teams who want to role play and things like that. And you will get some valuable feedback that way. But again, your internal folks are not your target customer. You need to make sure that you go out and seek that feedback from the right people, whether you do it with a company like Centercode or not. You need to go out there and try to discover the things that you and your internal team have not thought of yet. It'll help you kind of uncover the unknowns, and also help you understand what your customer cares about and what they don't care about, which is very important in terms of prioritization and managing workload. Not everything can be the highest priority item. But, when you're just deciding what those things are from an internal view, you can get focused on the right things. I mean, sometimes it's very obvious, right? But in other times it's not. And understanding what your customers do care about and what they don't care about is extremely important when you're trying to manage a workload and a schedule and prioritize, what your team should really spend its time on. Because I know at least, at Watkins, where we have many balls in the air at any given time, that deciding what we don't work on is just as important as deciding what we do work on. And getting that feedback from your kind of real customers will help you make a better informed decision as to what you do work on versus don't work on. So, telling my younger self, it would just be like, what? Be vulnerable. Show your vulnerability. You don't know everything. Your team doesn't know everything. Go out and get that help, get that feedback, because that's going to, at the end of the day, enable you and the company to build better products and enable your success. So, don't be afraid to ask and just have an open mind.
Yeah, some wise words to end on there. So, Mike, thank you for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks for tuning in. You can find us on any of your favorite platforms for watching podcasts.